I don't know to what extent the French and German ambassadors are perhaps gratified or perhaps certainly surprised that the British commentator in this event should give quite such a rosy account of the Franco-German relationship. Clearly, its importance is absolutely pivotal. I was quite struck by some of the French media comment and the sort of special issue that Le Monde and Süddeutsche Zeitung did yesterday on the relationship. And it didn't mince its words about the respects in which the outputs fell in many ways well short of the very tight and impressive architectural and organizational aspects of the relationship. It dwelt a little bit, the commentary dwelt a little bit on familiar differences between France and Germany, particularly in the realm of economics, where Britain and Germany often see things alike, and obviously defense, where Britain and France are closer, and France and Germany don't see things alike. Clearly, there are aspects to. If you take all three countries together, there are various gaps that the three work more closely together, more efficiently together. That they can be more than the sum of their parts. I'm struck by in British discussions with Germany how. On the level of policies, British and Germans tend to agree, have more difficulty with institutional dossiers, and again, though with France it's the other way around, Britain and France tend to agree on institutions and have more difficulty with policies. So it's a long-winded way of saying clearly that there's particular gaps and asymmetries. If the three countries get together, perhaps they can apply themselves a little bit more effectively, and as I say, be more than the sum of their parts. Anyway, those are just familiar differences between the three countries. I make no claim for originality, but I suspect we'll come back to them in discussion. So we will run till 7:30, or perhaps a little bit after, with the permission of Chatham House. If I can ask you, please, to say if you'd like to speak, to stand when you put a question, say who you are, what your affiliation is. Please keep it short and sweet. Please don't try to smuggle a second question in under the first, the guy under the cover of the first. Wait for the roving mic, and we'll start by taking questions one by one. Yes. The mics. Grab the mic. Sorry. Oh, okay. Right, there's a misunderstanding, but okay, please.
Well, thank you very much for your fascinating expositions. My name is Ronald Harrison. I'm a member of Chatham House. I'm married to a German, introduced to me by a Pole, and I have a French sister-in-law, and my mother was half Italian. So I'm extremely pro-European. But the question I have for you is purely pragmatic, being a Brit, and that is, there are two problems we have, I think, probably, in the UK-European relationship. One certainly concerns the euro, which a great many people thought would never work, and it is still, in our view, a problem. And I want to ask, in particular, Ulrike, how do the Germans see the development of the euro? Do you think that Germany will be left carrying the can indefinitely for the southern countries of Europe? And the second problem we have, I think, is the bureaucracy in Brussels and the corruption that is endemic in some parts of it, particularly the aid program. I'd be very interested in your comments on those points.
Panel, please. We'll take the questions one by one. That was actually two questions, but never mind. Okay. Ulrike, would you like to please reply?
Well, I think Germany is coming to grips to just overstate the argument that if you want to create an empire, you have to be generous. And as the European value chain, industrial value chain, is anyway, say, largely German, we have now successfully changed a lazy Greeks fiscal union transfer discourse into we make it happen. That happened last year. The German government tuned around. I think this was obvious for all those who followed nicely. And in a way, and that is the interesting part of the German-British discussion here, is the very moment the German adopted a British stance on Europe, which was in the crisis, at every moment of the crisis, we will do the very necessary to save the euro from collapsing, the Brits stepped out of discussion. That was, to me, the biggest surprise. The moment Germany basically cancelled big federal ambitions and went pragmatic, but understood that its destiny is bound to the euro, and made it happen in a very pragmatic way with every step at each time, the UK stepped out in sulking and is today in the sulking position. So I think Germany has changed the discourse. You will exit the left party, find nobody in the German sort of serious political spectrum who would not say that we are already in fiscal union, that you will need to pay more for Europe. We had Mrs. Merkel agreeing on fiscal stability within the Eurozone. We had discussions on fiscal capacity of the Eurozone. We are talking about a fiscal budget for the Eurozone. These negotiations aren't ended. We all know that the Council conclusions by December have been watered down. That's a normal process in Europe. But I think Germany is strongly committed to not pay for the South, to understand that debitor and creditor nations are basically intertwined, that everybody has a benefit. Obviously, we will make them grow. By the way, they will be growing. Every economist is telling me that by 2015, these countries will will have some fruits of the supply side policies that have been applied. So I think it will be a win-win situation, and the German discourse changed on this definitely.
Thanks very much. Anand, you were wanting to come in on that?
Well, on the corruption question, it's undeniable that there have been problems with EU aid policies and with money going astray in those. There are moves underway to tighten audit and to improve management procedures. I don't know if they're going to work as yet. But on the general issue of this notion that we have in this country that the EU is corrupt, the best way to deal with the misspending of EU funds would be to create a bigger EU bureaucracy that has the wherewithal to police the spending of those funds in the member states. This isn't Brussels bureaucrats going on a shopping trip. This is people in member states misusing EU funds that are then not accounted for, that then the auditors pick up when they look at the EU budget and say the EU budget cannot be approved. But the vast majority of the misspending that goes on isn't going on in Brussels. It is because there's insufficient oversight of the spending of EU funds in member states.
Okay, thank you very much. The first person who caught so I will keep faith with him. Then afterwards, Richard Ottaway, Lord Boswell, and at the back, Laura Sands.
Thank you very much. William Horsley, a journalist who's covered Europe very closely for many years. I think that since we have three political scientists here, it is a real shame we haven't heard any sensible response or analysis to David Cameron's speech. And the British speaker from the panel more or less accepted the routine position that Britain is a troublemaker in Europe. I think the point about the David Cameron speech, and its relatively good reception, is that he did try to outline a vision of Europe with which the British would be comfortable. That was exactly what he said. So perhaps you could help us, since the EU has been so creative in its handling of difficulties like popular referendums and treaties which get rejected, to consider how the EU system might actually respond to this sensible, I think, set of proposals from an important member state. A number of things have been proposed. The LSE said possibly you could have a statement on a new statement on subsidiarity. Possibly, Leon Britton has said perhaps you could revert to the position, if Britain wanted it, before Tony Blair's government opted into the social chapter. There are a number of things on the table, and it would be nice to hear how you think that there could be a constructive response.
Okay. Perhaps I can invite a panel just to come up with one suggestion, one proposal each, or sort of one, rather than a sort of long shopping list. There's lots of questions to get through, but please go.
It will be quite simple. Keep the analysis, which I think was fair enough in many respects, but go about getting what you want in a slightly more measured way. I mean, my problem is not with what he said he wanted to change in the EU system, much of which I agreed with, but the fact that he said change or we might end up leaving is not the way to endear yourself to other member states or indeed to get what you want.
Dominique. Sorry.
Well, if I may, I think in my country, France, there was a slight relief in the sense that we could have expected much worse from the speech, and at the same time still a feeling that you don't progress by doing blackmail, because this is perceived as blackmail. This is perceived as a domestic operation in order to appease one part of the electorate, and the calendar that is suggested 2017, who is going to be in power in Great Britain in 2017? Who's going to be in power in France or in Germany for that matter? So the calendar itself re-emphasizes the element of immediate political blackmail, and something which I don't find European.
Is a 4 or 5 year calendar blackmail? It's a rather
Well,
gentle, protracted.
Well, 5
sort of-
years, it's
yes.
a long time. If you don't change the way you behave, we may leave you through referendum. No, it is blackmail.
Ulrike.
I would also argue, in response to the question, that the ball is not in the camp of Europe now. I mean, I think the UK is largely overestimating the bargaining chips, also in a legal perspective. I've been talking to a couple of policymakers today, and as long as the UK hasn't pointed out by which method, 148, you need to collect 13 allies within the European Union, you go for intra-European treaty change if we are targeting treaty change, a sort of real treaty change with referenda. I wouldn't say that you find 13 countries that go with you. You perhaps find the Czechs, perhaps not, you know? I mean, my message here is you are more alone than you think, yeah? After what happened on the fiscal compact, exit the Czechs, you are more alone than you think. You think you have big coalition building capacity in the northern part of Europe. I would argue you don't if I check just my email and my friends from Estonia who called you the day after, yeah? So I give you this as a simplicity sort of, so you are overestimating your bargaining chips, and I think the ball is in the UK camp to now define whether you want to have little bilateral protocols that we give you something on fishery policies. If you think that that is a strategic interest for the UK, you may. We can also discuss a working hour directive if that you think is a strategic interest of the UK. Probably we find a nice solutions to, but if it's about a 148 action in the treaty sense or so, I think you will find yourself more alone than you think, and we are not accommodating at any price. Yeah?
So the key thing, presumably, is to show goodwill in the talks and to give the impression that you actually want the whole project to succeed rather than fail. So it's a tonal question. And secondly, it is to have a very precise and short list of things which are particularly sensitive for the UK, which need attending to. If it's a long shopping list, obviously we'll forfeit our partners' goodwill and patience. If it's very precise, if it's very, very focused, probably I imagine, particularly on social employment, the EU actually has a pretty good track record of accommodating a country which is a particular difficulty, and there is a great willingness to make things work. So I think the ball is really in the British court, and if they're highly focused and approach things in a positive way, I would not be quite as pessimistic as perhaps the rest of the panel.
I'm not
anyway,
pessimistic.
you're not pessimistic. No, but I think that it is potentially manageable. Anyway, Richard Ottaway.
Richard Ottaway, Conservative MP and Chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee in the House of Commons. My response to Dominique, it's not blackmail, it's inevitable. There is disagreement, there is going to be renegotiation, there will be a new agreement, there will be a new treaty, and it will be put to a referendum. And that is not blackmail, that is a fact of life. But my question is, does the support of Britain to France in Mali at the moment on a military basis illustrate that when the going gets rough, Britain is a country that can be relied upon to help out when necessary?
Well,
Dominique.
I had a series of talks today on that subject. I do not sense a huge British enthusiasm to send troops to Mali. There is a feeling in my country that when it comes to security, the understanding of London remains of a different quality than the understanding of Berlin. But at the same time, we are trying to convince the rest of Europe, and for that matter, the West at large, that Africa may be becoming for the West what Europe was for the United States during the Cold War, i.e. their first line of defense. There are terrorists there. It's not a war against terrorism, but against terrorists, which are a threat to all of us. It concerns the German, it concerns the British, it concerns all Europeans and Americans. And of course, I mean, the big issue, I would say, it starts with the foreign policy debate between Romney and Obama on October 22nd. If you remember, the first question is on the Middle East, and Romney speaks of Mali. So it may be, of course, the lack of geographical knowledge of the Americans. But it may also be that in thematical terms, he immediately notice that it's more than Africa. It's much more linked to the Middle East. It's much closer to Afghanistan, and it concerns us all. So we are welcoming the help of the British in material, in intelligence, in whatever. But I can see that your enthusiasm is limited. You have more enthusiasm to change the European Constitution than to send troops to Mali, which I can understand, by the way.
It's early days, but David Cameron has been pretty forthright on the nature of the problem and how we actually have to find a common solution. Anand, did you want to come in on this point? No. Ulrike? If not, I'm happy to move on because there's been a forest of hands trying to get my attention. Otherwise, we'll move on. Lord Boswell.
Boswell, Chairman of the EU Select Committee in the House of Lords. The room is not set up for a confessional either in the religious or the diplomatic sense. So let me make my confession to you. I've studied two articles of the Lisbon Treaty today. The first was Article 50, and for those who haven't looked it up recently, it's the exit clause. And then I became thoroughly depressed and turned back to Article 2, which is the values clause. And I think perhaps that makes the point. I've noted from the presentations of the two ambassadors through the three fascinating presentations we've heard an emphasis on values. And my question to the panel is, in conducting what may be quite a long campaign, which I hope will lead to a positive conclusion for this country and for Europe, is it unwise to continue to base our arguments simply on the British preoccupation with whether or not some relatively minor element, either of the economic or social arrangements, has been satisfied, given that actually there is an entirely different political flavour which isn't about those issues? Or should we be looking for the wider picture? Arguably, one of the reasons that there's been a political failure in Britain, in my view, is because we've not emphasised those values for a very long time. In other words, very simply, is the next 5 years going to be the Western Front all over again? Very bloody, close quarter, disastrous conflict? Or is it going to be a move of immensely brilliant strategic diversions from this rather sterile debate?
Thank you. Ulrike.
First, I'm convinced that you will make it. Huh? You have 5 years, your young people will wake up, the city will wake up, and you are peaking now the now argument, so it's 5, when the City of London will buy some PR agencies to make the discourse, then perhaps, The second is Voltaire, Candide, il faut cultiver son jardin. If you aren't careful for your discourse, the mushrooms sprießen auf der anderen Seite. Yeah? And I'm German and I know what I'm talking about because I lived through the 29, 10, 11 period of German discourse. And that's your question. Do you need to open up or to be on special policies? German basically narrowed down a discussion about its place in Europe to lazy Greeks and fiscal transfer union. Yeah? And the moment that happened, we were ein Schritt to lose the discourse. Yeah? And we carried that for 6-8 months, and some people, and I'm vain enough to say that I were among those people, wrote day and day against this narrowing down the discourse. The moment we recontextualize the whole thing, crashing out the arguments about our position in Europe, the historical context, the political context, and the value context, we could win the discussion. And that happened basically since last year. The Foreign Service was perfect in U-turning a discussion. Germany is a functioning country. If you win the elites back on your argument, you win the elites back, and every sort of segment of elites holds its constituency, meaning the trade unions were holding the you see what I mean, yeah? So you can engineer a discourse, at least Germany could, and I'm very confident the UK can.
Anand, did you want to come in?
Well, I certainly don't think the debate should focus on the minutiae. And again, I think the Prime Minister made the case rather well in his speech. To be perfectly honest, the need for Britain and Europeans to act together in a global competition that he spoke about, I think the argument is there. And I very much hope it's carried out in those terms, to be honest.
Dominique, did you want to add anything?
Well, I've spoken already at great length, but very quickly, I think it's about identity more than anything else. And from that standpoint, the British are of Europe. They are a clear part of Europe in cultural terms, in historical terms, but somewhere being part of the Union is going down in life. There is that sense of democratic superiority, that sense of, in a way, you have a different geography and history. And with time, this returns with a vengeance. It's not that the process of time has brought you closer to Europe. I feel just the opposite attitude, just the opposite evolution. So I hope Ulrike is right. But I think she speaks like Corneille, how the world should be, and not like Racine, how the world is. And in my vision, which is closer to Racine than to Corneille, I'm not sure. I think at some point you may be closer to Norway, and then there will be other ideas that will come to your mind and to the mind of others. The Turk will say, that's the way. We'll be European the way the British are. So you don't know. I mean, you are playing with very dangerous leverage given the identity specificity of Great Britain. Mind you, I admire that.
I'm going to go right to the back. Laura Sands. Right at the very back. So right at the back, and then Philip Stevens afterwards.
Hi, hello, thank you. My name's Laura Sands. I'm a member of Parliament, a conservative Euro-realist. Quite an endangered species these days.
Nonsense.
In my conversations with my colleagues, and in particular looking at issues, talking to much more Eurosceptical members of Parliament, they very much look at Europe as a relationship that Britain has to decide whether it's in Europe or in the rest of the world. Now, I absolutely disagree with that fundamentally, but I do think that we need help within Parliament and maybe within the country to understand the ambitions that Europe has or could have internationally. Because our constant discussion and debate about Europe is about institutional debate. It's not about ambition. It's about which law is in, out, what are the Germans going to take from us. It's a very, very zero-sum game. What we need to have is a little bit more understanding, and I think you get it much more on the continent in your commentary and the coverage about Europe, about what our continent has ambitions for and what big challenges are we facing. Because I don't think we can underestimate those.
Okay, would any of our panelists like to make a quick comment on that? As I'd like to raise 2 or 3 more questions. And Ulrike?
I agree perfectly with you, and I think you are pointing to the still German weakness in the story. Yeah, Because to again overstate the argument, I'm not in the diplomatic service. I think export alone is not a strategy, and economy and strategy need to come together. And as long as Germany is a little bit playing the movie sort of wealthy Switzerland in the middle, we get it all, but we don't show the responsibility which is required from us in terms of a vision for what Europe stands for, a normative context, Libya, Mali, and so on and so forth. There is a real argument about the global ambition where Germany is lagging behind. And one can only wish in a forum like this that France and the UK work together to sort of pulling Germany into that argument that strategy and economy belong together and they need to meld. The real problem here is that we have been told for 40 years that we better don't do strategy. Now everybody's wanting strategy from us, so give us a little time. I think we are just learning it.
Thank you. If either of you...
Yeah. One of the areas where I want this country to play a leading role, because I think a lot of our partners are very insular, and we should be leading the way now. I mean, think of the issues on the agenda now, dealing with security threats to the south and at promoting the free trade agreement with the United States. I mean, we're just the ideal state to be leading the way on this.
In fairness, it's been the narrative of several British governments, and including very much David Cameron, that there is a world elsewhere. We risk getting too absorbed in institutional navel-gazing. There are rising economic powers. It's a scary place out there. We need to rise to these global challenges. There is the outline of a British sort of a global narrative as well, but it's which ought to be able to provide terrain for convergence, because it's very close to the French idea, and indeed the German idea, that we're all sunk. If Europe is sunk if we don't actually work more effectively together. I'm not sure that there's such a difference in basic analysis in here. Sorry, Dominique, and then I want to come back to...
Just a quick word on that. I remember a time in the 1960s when the British were candidate to Europe, and when General de Gaulle said no and used the image of the Trojan horse. And now the Americans are telling the British, please, remain in Europe. We want you in the European Union as a full actor. What an irony of sort. And you have to think in a way of the concept of the West. There's an American West, there's a European West, there is an Asian West, if you want, through Japan. Can there be a fourth West, which is a British West? I'm not sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure there's enough in the world for that.
Thank you, Dominique. Philip Stevens.
I wanted actually to raise the point that Dominique has just raised, because no one's mentioned until now the fourth member of this troika, the United States. What Dominique didn't say was that de Gaulle's meeting with Adenauer came 2 weeks after his famous press conference where he said publicly that British entry to the then common market would lead to an American takeover. As you've said, France after Suez thought it could build Europe against the United States. Britain thought it could shelter from Europe with the United States. And both have been proved entirely wrong. But I suppose my question, the other irony we see now, is not just Obama telling Cameron, you've got to stay in the European Union, but it's Hollande going to Obama and saying, please, can we have some refueling tankers for our operations in Africa? We want more America, not less. But my question, I suppose, for Dominique is France really at ease now with the United States, as its elites sometimes say?
Well, globally, yes. There are definitely some old layers of anti-Americanism that remain, but they are not in power. They are not overwhelming. There has been a great evolution. And from that standpoint, the election and then the re-election of Barack Obama has been definitely a great plus. It has made a huge difference. America has become a source of model and interrogation. When are we going to have the French equivalent of Barack Obama in Europe? This is the kind of question. And you're right, the paradox in many ways is with the leading from behind, a new American motto, the French appear as the most pro-intervention country in the world. There are people who say the new Bush is in the Élysée Palace. This is, I don't take it too seriously because I don't think this is the case. But there is obviously that element of interrogation. Is Mali going to be the Afghanistan of France, or for that matter, the Afghanistan of Europe? We don't know. The problem is we have to adjust to problems as they come. And right now the problem for France in Mali is that the United States is no longer what it used to be. It is that Europe remains what it is, and it is that Africa is not the way we want it to become. And this is going to last for some time. So we are in a problem.
Very quickly, either Anand or Ulrike, do you want to come in on that? I'm going to take two more questions. We should have ended at 7:30. But the lady there has been patiently waiting, and the gentleman over there shall ask.
Emma Reynolds, Labour MP and Shadow Europe Minister. I want to veer away from yesterday if I can. I think that the decision by David Cameron in December 2011 to walk out of that European summit was a break with successive governments' approach in the UK to Europe by taking ourselves out of the room deliberately. Will the Fiscal Compact Treaty become a model for further integration when those who want to integrate go forward? Or will there be treaty change? We heard this date yesterday, slightly arbitrary date of 2017. What is the timetable in France and Germany for treaty change in the future? Has Chancellor Merkel gone cold on the idea? The French don't seem very keen. What is the likelihood of any treaty change by that date or further into the future?
Well, it's really his best guess territory. If we can do a quick stab at an answer to that rather difficult question, please, and then we'll think.
A crystal ball, but and there are legal arguments to make what can be done without treaty change. You know all these discussions, and even in Germany, you have divided opinion whether you need to go for more fiscal. I mean, especially a common banking scheme, a common deposit scheme in the banking union, whether you need constitutional change or not. Yeah? So it's a very complicated question. But I think, in essence, what needs to be understood, and here comes the British in. Yeah, the UK argument was for decades, we told you so. It cannot function that way. The moment the continent addresses, the Euroland addresses this question, you're moving out. So this is schizophrene. Yeah? We are basically responding to the UK or Anglo-Saxon press argument that the monetary union cannot function like this. We are trying with hurdles and problems to fix the problem, which are legitimacy problems, sovereignty problems, the definitions of sovereignty, of budgetary sovereignty, parliamentary problems of supervision and control. We're having choices whether we want to shift the system to a more parliamentarian sense in the fiscal compact supervision, that it's a Eurozone parliament controlling instance, or more a super saving commissioner. So even if I'm not expressing myself here about the righthoodness of a fiscal ceiling, yeah, because even you can make the argument that it's not such a good policy, yeah, but these are the choices the union will face, and I think we will address them. And it's still open, I think, in the discussion. I would say that if the European elections go sort of good and we get a new commission with perhaps Barroso again, who has been showing more bold than ever in the 5th of December proposals, then we have a decent chance to do chirurgical treaty changes. And it will be left again to the UK side to integrate the fiscal compact compendium into the integrative part of the treaties. And it will again be a British decision to, yes or no, stand outside of this movement.
Our other panelists like to come in on this.
Well, just to say,
timetable.
There is a structural problem we face in Britain, which is that the euro exists and there are a group of member states with interests that are different to ours in managing that currency. Personally, I think we should try and stay at the table as long as possible to be involved in the discussions, if only to safeguard our interests when things like banking union come up, which I have to say this government has done rather well. I think the deal we got in banking union was a remarkable deal. for the outs. But that is something we need to keep a careful eye on in the months and years to come. And you could only do that by participating in the negotiations fully.
Thank you. Dominique, do you want to come in? No. Gentleman over there. Yes.
Willem van Hasselt, Foreign Affairs, The Hague. I hope, Chairman, you allow me to mention the word Maastricht,
Please
over
do.
which Dutch presided. But I want to take it back to nowadays. If I'm short about Maastricht, I tend to say Maastricht produced two things: a serious monetary union and a ghost called political union. And the Dutch have had their experience in that field in those days, between Bonn and Paris. The word political union was rarely used in France, but it struck me that President Hollande, when he spoke to the French ambassadors, suddenly used the word political union. And I thought, oh, look back. And I must also say that some of us in the Netherlands wondered how certain Germans kept using the word political union. So the ghost is around the room. Now I take the other word. After Maastricht, there was a word the Germans didn't like: economic governance. And under Van Rompuy chairmanship, we had economic governance is introduced. So let's say this, Mr. Moïsi, does it make sense to use the word political union? Is there something in France developing which allows that to happen? And thank you.
Okay. You mentioned this at the end. Yes.
You
Okay,
remind
please.
me of Paul Valéry being accepted at the French Academy and someone introducing him and summarizing his work. And Paul Valéry said, "Oh, I didn't know I had been writing or thinking such things. I'm not sure you should think that there is so much philosophical, political thinking. My understanding, and of course I speak with the total irresponsibility of an academic who has no political responsibilities, is that the French president tries to be as ambiguous as he can about any European concept, because he knows very clearly that in particular on that subject, he has no clear majority within his own party. And so that the division that exists amongst the socialists between those who voted no in 2005 and those who voted yes in 2005, these problems have not yet been solved. So the clarity you attribute to my president is admirable, but maybe closer to Lewis Carroll than to political reality.
Thanks very much. Ulrike.
Well, I mean, doing a little bit of advocacy, but ECFR just published a paper on what is political union, and we tried to work out a little bit what the Germans understand, right? Here's my take. 20 years we fought between France and Germany on semantics, between gouvernement économique and political union. And it's different words for the same thing, which is that with Maastricht we disentangled the state-market relationship. We put market there and currency there, we left state and social there. So either we bring it together, or probably we still have problems with the currency. And that is now the talk. And whether we frame it in gouvernement économique or political union, probably we will come in melting a different point of views, and we will say it's just about government. It's not economic governance, because there's no such thing like economic governance. All politics is money related, so all politics is economic governance. And if we could abandon just the economic of economic government, then we are only government, it's nearly political union. So what we are shaping now is a transnational democracy that decides about collective expenditure, and this is if we are going to enter a liability system through a banking union with a common deposit regime, that is the task that France and Germany in the next 50 years ought to do, and I think they will.
And we must sadly bring things to a close. I'm sorry that many people will be disappointed who had their hand up. I can only apologise. I don't think we've quite yet laid the basis for a Franco-German-British directoire, even if that was desirable. Is that desirable? But just by exploring some of the commonalities and differences, hopefully we've advanced cause of wisdom just a little bit. We've certainly had a very stimulating hour and a quarter, so big thank you to the panellists.